Chapter 5. Of course, I've been meaning lately to go to Razumikin's to ask for work, to ask him to get me lessons or something, Raskolnikov thought. But what help can he be to me now? Suppose he gets me lessons. Suppose he shares his last kopeck with me, if he has any kopecks, so that I could get some boots and make myself tidy enough to give lessons. Well, and what then? What will I do with a few coppers I earn? That's not what I want now. It's really absurd for me to go to Razumikin. The question why he was now going to Razumikin agitated him even more than he was himself aware. He kept uneasily seeking for some sinister significance in this apparently ordinary action. Could I have expected to set it all straight and to find a way out by means of Razumikin alone? He asked himself in perplexity. He pondered and rubbed at his forehead, and, strange to say, after long musing, suddenly, as if it were spontaneously and by chance, a very strange thought came into his head. To Razumikin's, he said all at once, calmly, as though he had reached a final determination. I will go to Razumikin's, of course, but not now. I will go to him on the next day after it, when it will already be over and everything will begin afresh. And suddenly he realized what he was thinking. After it, he shouted, jumping up from the bench. But is it really going to happen? Is it possible it really will happen? He left the bench and went off almost at a run. He meant to turn back, homewards, but the thought of going home suddenly filled him with intense loathing. It was in that hole, in that awful little cupboard of his, that all this had for more than a month now been growing up in him. And he walked on at random. His nervous shudder had passed into a fever that made him feel shivering. In spite of the heat, he felt cold. With a kind of effort, he began almost unconsciously, from some inner necessity, to stare at all the objects before him, as though looking for something to distract his attention. But he did not succeed, and kept lapsing every moment into brooding. When with a start he lifted his head again and looked around, he forgot at once what he had just been thinking about, and even where he was going. In this way he walked right across Vasilyevsky Island, and came out onto the Lesser Neva, crossed the bridge and turned towards the islands. The greenness and freshness were at first restful to his weary eyes, used to the dust and grime of the town, and the huge houses that hemmed him in and weighed upon him. Here there were no taverns, no stuffiness, no stench. But soon these new pleasant sensations turned into morbid irritability. Sometimes he stood still before a brightly painted summer villa, standing among green foliage. He gazed through the fence. He saw in the distance fashionably dressed women on the verandas and balconies, and children running in the gardens. The flowers especially caught his attention. He gazed at them longer than at anything. He was met, too, by luxurious carriages, and by men and women on horseback. He watched them with curious eyes, and forgot about them before they had vanished from his sight. Once he stopped and counted his money. He found he had 30 kopecks. 20 to the policeman, 3 to Nastasia for the letter, so I must have given 47 or 50 to the Marmeladovs yesterday, he thought, making calculations for some unknown reason. But he soon forgot why he had taken the money out of his pocket. He recalled it on passing an eating-house or tavern, and felt that he was hungry. Going into the eatery, he drank a glass of vodka and ate a pie of some sort. He finished eating it when he was on the road again. It was a long while since he had taken vodka, and it had an effect upon him at once, though he only drank a wine-glassful. His legs felt suddenly heavy, and a great drowsiness came upon him. He turned homewards, but reaching Petrovsky Island, he stopped completely exhausted, turned off the road into the bushes, sank down upon the grass, and instantly fell asleep. In a morbid condition of the brain, dreams often have an extraordinary distinctiveness, vividness, an extraordinary semblance of reality. At times, monstrous images are created, but the setting and the entire process of imagining are so truth-like, and filled with details so delicate, so unexpected, but so artistically consistent with the picture as a whole, that the dreamer, were he an artist like Pushkin or Turgenev even, could never have invented them in the waking state. Such sick dreams always remain long in the memory, and make a powerful impression on the overwrought and excited nervous system. Raskolnikov dreamed a frightening dream. He dreamt he was back in his childhood, in their little town. He is a child about 7 years old, walking in the countryside with his father on the evening of a holiday. It is a grey and stifling day. The country is exactly as he remembered it. Indeed, he recalled it far more vividly in his dream than he had done in memory. The little town stands on a level flat as bare as the hand, not a willow near it. Only in the far distance a wood lies, a dark blur on the very edge of the horizon. A few paces beyond the last market garden stands a tavern, a big tavern, which had always aroused in him a feeling of aversion, even of fear when he walked by it with his father. There was always such a crowd there, such shouting, laughter, and swearing, such hideous, hoarse singing and often fighting. Drunken and scary mugs were always hanging about the tavern. He used to cling close to his father, trembling all over when he met them. Near the tavern the road becomes a track, always dusty, and the dust is always so black. It is a winding road, and about 100 paces further on it turns to the right to the graveyard. In the middle of the graveyard is a stone church with a green cupola, where he used to go to Mass 2 or 3 times a year with his father and mother, when a service was held in memory of his grandmother, who had long been dead, and whom he had never seen. On these occasions they used to take on a white dish tied up in a table napkin a special sort of rice pudding with raisins stuck in it in the shape of a cross. He loved that church, the old-fashioned icons with no setting, and the old priest with the shaking head. Near his grandmother's grave, which was marked by a stone, was the little grave of his younger brother, who had died at 6 months old. He did not remember him at all, but he had been told about his little brother, and whenever he visited the graveyard, he used religiously and reverently to cross himself, and to bow down and kiss the little grave. And now he is dreaming that he is walking with his father past the tavern on the way to the graveyard. He is holding his father's hand and looking with dread at the tavern. A peculiar circumstance attracts his attention. There seems to be some kind of festivity going on here. There are crowds of gaily dressed townspeople, peasant women, their husbands, and riffraff of all sorts. All are singing, all are drunk, and near the entrance of the tavern there is a cart, but a strange cart. It is one of those big carts, usually drawn by heavy cart horses and laden with casks of wine or other heavy goods. He always liked looking at those great cart horses with their long manes, thick legs, and slow, even pace, drawing along a perfect mountain with no appearance of effort, as though it were easier going with a load than without it. But now, strange to say, in the shafts of such a cart, he sees a thin little sorrel beast, one of those peasants' nags which he had often seen straining their utmost under a heavy load of wood or hay, especially when the wheels were stuck in the mud or in a rut. And the peasants would beat them with whips so cruelly, sometimes even about the nose and eyes. And he felt so sorry for them, that he almost cried. And his mother always used to take him away from the window. All of a sudden there is a great uproar of shouting, singing, and the balalaika. And from the tavern a number of big and very drunken peasants come out, wearing red and blue shirts and coats thrown over their shoulders. "Get in! Get in!" shouts one of them, a young, thick-necked peasant with a fleshy face red as a carrot. "I'll take you all! Get in!" But at once there is an outbreak of laughter and exclamations in the crowd. "Take us all with a beast like that? Why, Mikolka, are you crazy to put a nag like that in such a cart? And this mare is 20 if she is a day, pals." "Get in, I'll take you all!" Mikolka shouts again, leaping first into the cart, seizing the reins and standing straight up in front. "The bay has gone with Matvey," he shouts from the cart. "And this brute, pals, is just breaking my heart. I could kill her. She's just eating her head off. Get in, I tell you. I'll make her gallop. She'll gallop." And he picks up the whip, preparing himself with relish to flog the little mare. "Get in, come along," the crowd is laughing. "Do you hear? She'll gallop." "Gallop indeed. She has not had a gallop in her for the last 10 years. "She'll jog along." "No being sorry for her, pals. Bring a whip, each of you. Get ready." "That's right. Give it to her." They all clamber into Mikolka's cart, laughing and making jokes. 6 of them get in, and there is still room for more. They haul in a fat, rosy-cheeked woman. She is dressed in red cotton, in a pointed, beaded headdress and warm boots. She is cracking nuts and laughing. The crowd round them is laughing too, and really, how could they help laughing? That wretched nag is to drag all the cartload of them at a gallop. 2 young lads in the cart get whips ready right away to help Mikulka. With the cry of "Go!" the mare tugs with all her might, but far from galloping can scarcely move forward. She is struggling with her legs, gasping and shrinking from the blows of the 3 whips showered upon her like hail. The laughter in the cart and in the crowd is redoubled, but Mikulka flies into a rage and thrashes the mare furiously, with quickened blows, as though he thinks she really can gallop. "Let me get in too, pals," shouts a young man in the crowd, his appetite aroused. "Get in, all get in!" cries Mikulka. "She'll pull you all. Now beat her to death!" And he thrashes and thrashes at the mare, beside himself with fury. "Father, father," he cries. "Father, what are they doing? Father, they are beating the poor horse." Come along," says his father. "They are drunk and foolish, having fun. Come away, don't look." And he tries to lead him away, but he tears himself away from his hand, and, beside himself with horror, runs to the horse. But the poor horse is already in a bad way. She is gasping, pausing, then tugging again and almost falling. "Beat her to death!" cries Mikulka. "It's come to that. I'll do her in." "What are you about? Are you a Christian, you devil?" shouts an old man in the crowd. "Did anyone ever see anything like it? A wretched nag like that pulling such a cartload," adds another. "You'll kill her," shouts the third. "Stay out! It's my property. I do as I like. Get in, more of you. Everyone get in. She'll go at a gallop, I say." All of a sudden, laughter breaks into a roar and covers everything. The mare, roused by a shower of blows, in her impotence, had begun kicking. Even the old man could not help smiling. To think of a wretched little nag like that trying to kick. 2 lads in the crowd snatch up whips and run to the mare to beat her about the ribs, 1 on each side. "Lash her in the face, in the eyes, cries Mikulka. "Give us a song, pals," shouts someone in the cart, and everyone in the cart joins in a riotous song, jingling a tambourine and whistling in the refrains. The woman goes on cracking nuts and laughing. He runs beside the mare, runs in front of her, sees her being whipped across the eyes, right in the eyes. He is crying. His heart is rising. His tears are streaming. One of the men gives him a cut with the whip across the face. He does not feel it. Wringing his hands and screaming, he rushes up to the grey-headed old man with the grey beard, who is shaking his head in disapproval. One woman seizes him by the hand and wants to take him away, but he tears himself from her and runs back to the horse. She is almost at the last gasp, but begins kicking once more. "I'll teach you to kick!" Mikulka shouts ferociously. He throws down the whip, bends forward and picks up from the bottom of the cart a long, thick shaft, takes hold of one end with both hands, and with an effort brandishes it over the mare. "He'll crush her!" was shouted round him. He'll kill her!" "It's my property!" shouts Mikulka, and brings the shaft down with a swinging blow. There is a sound of a heavy thud. "Thrasher! Thrasher! What's the matter?" shout voices in the crowd. And Mikulka swings the shaft a second time, and a blow falls a second time on the spine of the luckless mare. She sinks back on her haunches, but lurches forward and tugs forward, tugs with all her force, first on one side and then on the other, trying to move the cart. But the 6 whips are attacking her in all directions, and the shaft is raised again and falls a 3rd time, then a 4th, with heavy measured blows. Mikulka is furious that he cannot kill her at one blow. "She's a tough one," they shout. "She'll fall in a minute, pals, you'll see, and that's the end of her," shouts an admiring spectator in the crowd. "Get an axe, hell, finish her off," shouts a 3rd. "Dare, eat the flies, make way," Mikulka screams frantically, throws down the shaft, stoops down in the cart, and picks up an iron crowbar. "Look out!" he shouts, and with all his might deals a stunning blow at his poor mare. The blow crashes down. The mare staggers, sinks back, tries to pull, but the bar falls again with a swinging blow on her back, and she falls on the ground as if all 4 legs had been knocked out from her at once. "Finish her off!" shouts Mikulka, and beside himself leaps out of the cart. Several young men, also red and drunk, seize anything they come across, whips, sticks, poles, and run to the dying mare. Mikulka stands on one side and begins dealing random blows to her back with the crowbar. The mare stretches out her muzzle, draws a long breath, and dies. "You butchered her!" someone shouts in the crowd. "Should have galloped." "My property!" shouts Mikulka with bloodshot eyes, brandishing the bar in his hands. He stands as though regretting that he has nothing more to beat. "No mistake about it, you are not a Christian," many voices are shouting in the crowd. But the poor boy is already beside himself. He makes his way screaming through the crowd to the sorrel nag, puts his arms round her bleeding dead muzzle, and kisses it, kisses the eyes and the lips. Then he suddenly jumps up and flies in a frenzy with his little fists out at Mikulka. At that instant his father, who had long been running after him, snatches him up and carries him out of the crowd. "Come along, come, let's go home," he says to him. "Father, why did they kill the poor horse?" he sobs. But his breath catches, and the words come in shrieks from his panting chest. "They are drunk, fooling around. It's not our business," says his father. He puts his arms round his father, but he feels choked. He tries to draw a breath, to cry out, and wakes up. He woke up sweating, gasping for breath, his hair soaked with perspiration, and stood up in terror. "Thank God that was only a dream," he said, sitting down under a tree and drawing deep breaths. "But what is it? Is it some fever coming on? Such a hideous dream! His whole body felt broken. Darkness and confusion were in his soul. He rested his elbows on his knees and put his head in his hands. "Good God!" he cried. Can it be that I will really take an axe, that I will strike her on the head, split her skull open, that I will tread in the sticky, warm blood, break the lock, steal and tremble, hide all spattered in the blood, with the axe? Good God, can it be?" He was shaking like a leaf as he said this. "But why am I going on like this?" he continued, sitting up again, as it were in profound amazement. "I knew that I could never bring myself to it, so what have I been torturing myself for till now? Yesterday, when I went to make that experiment, yesterday I realized completely that I could never bear to do it. Why am I going over it again, then? Why have I till now been hesitating? As I came down the stairs yesterday, I said myself that it was base, loathsome, vile. The very thought of it made me feel sick when I wasn't dreaming, and filled me with horror. No, I couldn't stand it. Granted that there is no flaw in all that reasoning, that all that I have concluded this last month is clear as day, true as arithmetic. My God, still I couldn't bring myself to it. I couldn't stand it. Why then am I still... He rose to his feet, looked round in wonder as though surprised at finding himself in this place, and went towards T Bridge. He was pale, his eyes glowed, he was exhausted in every limb, but he seemed suddenly to breathe more easily. He felt he had already cast off that fearful burden that had so long been weighing upon him, and all at once there was a sense of relief and peace in his soul. "Lord," he prayed, "show me my path. I renounce that accursed dream of mine." Crossing the bridge, he gazed quietly and calmly at the Neva, at the glowing red sun setting in the glowing sky. In spite of his weakness, he was not even conscious of fatigue. It was as though an abscess that had been forming for a month past in his heart had suddenly broken. Freedom! He was free now from that spell, that sorcery, that enchantment, that obsession. Later on, when he recalled that time and all that happened to him during those days, minute by minute, point by point, step by step, he was superstitiously impressed by one circumstance, which, though in itself not very exceptional, always seemed to him afterwards the predestined turning point of his fate. Namely, he could never understand and explain to himself why, when he was tired and worn out, when it would have been more convenient for him to go home by the shortest and most direct way, he had returned by the Haymarket, where he had no need to go. It was obviously and quite unnecessarily out of his way, though not much so. It is true that it happened to him dozens of times to return home without noticing what streets he passed through. But why, he was always asking himself, why had such an important, such a decisive, and at the same time such an absolutely chance meeting happened in the Haymarket, where he had, moreover, no reason to go, At the very hour, the very minute of his life, when he was just in the very mood, and in the very circumstances in which that meeting was able to exert the gravest and most decisive influence on his whole destiny, as though it had been lying in wait for him on purpose. It was about 9 o'clock when he crossed the Haymarket. At the tables and the barrows, at the booths and the stores, all the market people were closing their establishments, or clearing away and packing up their wares, and, like their customers, were going home. Rag-pickers and scroungers of all kinds were crowding round the eateries, and especially the taverns in the dirty and stinking courtyards of the Haymarket. Raskolnikov preferred this place and all the neighbouring alleys when he wandered aimlessly in the streets. Here his rags did not attract contemptuous attention, and one could walk about in anything without scandalizing people. At the corner of K Alley, the huckster and his wife had 2 tables set out with ribbons, thread, cotton handkerchiefs, etc. They, too, had got up to go home, but were lingering in conversation with a friend who had just come up to them. This friend was Lizaveta Ivanovna, or simply, as everyone called her, Lizaveta, the younger sister of the old pawnbroker Alyona Ivanovna, whom Raskolnikov had visited the previous day to pawn his watch and make his experiment. He already knew all about Lizaveta, and she knew him a little too. She was a single woman of about 35, tall, clumsy, timid, submissive, and almost idiotic. She was a complete slave to her sister, worked for her day and night, went in fear and trembling of her, and even suffered beatings from her. She was standing with a bundle before the huckster and his wife, listening earnestly and doubtfully. They were explaining something to her especially heatedly. The moment Raskolnikov caught sight of her, he was overcome by a strange sensation, as it were of intense astonishment, though there was nothing astonishing about this meeting. "You could make up your mind for yourself, Lizaveta Ivanovna," the huckster was saying aloud. "Come round tomorrow about 7. They will be here too." "Tomorrow?" said Lizaveta slowly and thoughtfully, as though unable to make up her mind. "Upon my word, what a fright you are in of Alyona Ivanovna!" gabbled the huckster's wife, a lively little woman. "I look at you, you are like some little babe. And she is not your own sister either. Nothing but a half-sister, and what a hand she keeps over you." "Just this time don't say a word to Alyona Ivanovna," her husband interrupted. "That's my advice, but come round to us without asking. It will be worth your while. Your sister may see for herself later on." "Should I come?" "About 7 o'clock tomorrow, and they will be here too. You'll decide for yourself." "And we'll have tea," added his wife. "All right, I'll come," said Lizaveta, still pondering, and she began slowly moving away. Raskolnikov had just passed and heard no more. He passed softly, unnoticed, trying not to miss a word. His first amazement turned gradually to horror, like a shiver running down his spine. He had suddenly and quite unexpectedly learned that the next day at 7 o'clock Lizaveta, the old woman's sister and only companion, would be away from home, and that therefore at 7 o'clock precisely the old woman would be left alone. He was only a few steps from his apartment. He went in like a man condemned to death. He thought of nothing and was completely incapable of thinking. But he felt suddenly in his whole being that he had no more freedom of thought, no will, and that everything was suddenly and irrevocably decided. Certainly, even if he had to wait whole years for a suitable opportunity, his plan in mind, he could not count for sure on a more certain step towards the success of the plan than that which suddenly had just presented itself. In any case, it would have been difficult to find out beforehand and with certainty, with greater exactness and less risk, and without dangerous inquiries and investigations, that next day, at such and such a time, such and such an old woman, on whose life an attempt was contemplated, would be at home entirely alone.